There Good afternoon and welcome to the FEMA Region 2 Individual and Community Preparedness webinar series. My name is Allison Albright and I am the Regional Preparedness Liaison for FEMA Region 2. I am going to provide a few technical considerations before we begin. Today's proceedings are being recorded and captioned. The archived event will be available on the FEMA website in the coming days. You should hear audio through your computer speakers, so please ensure your volume is turned up so you may hear the proceedings accordingly. In the top right corner, we ask if you'd like to receive news and updates from FEMA Region 2, and if so, please enter your email address and we'll be sure to add you to the distribution list. We will have a question and answer session after the presentation concludes. You'll see a Q&A pod in the lower right-hand corner. Please feel free to submit your questions about the subject matter there, and time permitting, we'll do our best to answer them. Finally, the PowerPoint presentation from today will be available for you to download in the file share pod as a PDF. You can click on the file and download it using the download button. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to the Region 2 Community Preparedness Officer to introduce our speaker and today's proceedings.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Debbie Casa, the Community Preparedness Officer for FEMA Region 2. On behalf of our team working to strengthen preparedness across New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, I'm so happy to welcome you all to our Preparedness and Resilience webinar series. The Region 2 Individual and Community Preparedness Division is focused on helping people prepare for disasters. That includes increasing the percentage of people who have taken steps to be better prepared in a pandemic environment, and delivering training to help nonprofits, small businesses, and community-based organizations continue service delivery following a disaster. As part of that goal, we're pleased to be hosting this webinar on creating accessible communications and developing effective strategies. This webinar is the second webinar in our series on this topic. Today, we will discuss solutions to the accessibility challenges virtual platforms can present. The speakers will be providing resources for print, TV, and radio communications and offer specific tools to help you write for your audience. We have three speakers today, beginning with Valerie Lewis. Valerie is the Administrator of Outreach Services for the Suffolk Cooperative Library System in Suffolk County, New York. Ms. Lewis provides training and continuing education resources on community engagement and partnerships and serves as the Outreach and ADA Liaison for the 56 public libraries in Suffolk County. Ms. Lewis is the lead for the Suffolk County FEMA Corps Advisory Group for people with access and functional needs and works closely with county emergency service providers and various veteran and healthcare organizations with the goal of bringing resources and contacts to the public libraries that will result in improving the health and well-being of each community. Our second speaker today is Gay Jones. Ms. Jones has worked for FEMA first at the regional level, and in 2013 she became the Disability Integration Communication Access Specialist with FEMA's Office of Disability Integration and Coordination and External Affairs at headquarters. Prior to joining FEMA, Ms. Jones worked over 30 years in human services and disability organizations, working in various roles with the state of Missouri and not-for-profit. Her experience includes working with various not-for-profit disability organizations, as well as the Missouri Assistive Technology for 18 years. Ms. Jones has extensive experience with disability policy, including the ADA, telecommunication access, education, and emergency management issues to allow for the inclusion of people with disabilities. Ms. Jones is the parent of a young adult woman who is deaf, adopted from China. She is a junior at Gallaudet University, majoring in international studies with a minor in IT. And our third and final speaker today is Mr. Aaron Kuby. Aaron joined FEMA in 2016 and currently serves as a certified deaf interpreter at FEMA headquarters in D.C. He has an added role of communication access specialist and has worked on many projects that positively impact how the agency incorporates effective communication access. He has successfully developed a library of over 50 accessible videos that include American Sign Language, captioning, and voiceovers, and he's led agency-wide efforts to implement plain language in public-facing documents. His unique experience as a certified deaf interpreter, disaster management professional, and champion of effective communication allows him to offer valuable influence on the agency's program and policies. He has also provided ASL support for the administrator and other key FEMA officials during hurricane press briefings and FEMA events. Mr. Kuby is a graduate of the DePaul Theater School and is actively pursuing his master's in public administration from American Public University. In his spare time, he is an avid Chicago Cubs fan and serves as director of artistic sign language for numerous theater productions and events across the country, including frequent performances at the renowned Kennedy Center. Thank you to all our speakers in advance today, and I will turn the mic over to Valerie to get us started.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Hello, everyone. I'd like to just let everyone know that for anyone who is unable to see the slides today, I will have 9 slides and will read as much information as possible from each of the slides, and will elaborate briefly on some of the sites mentioned, but will not be able to read the URLs aloud as time will not permit. There will be downloadable formats of this presentation in both PDF and Word, so you will be able to get the information there. Once again, I would like to thank FEMA for hosting this webinar and remind you that my presentation is on inclusive communication strategies for the emergency management cycle. Part 2 of my presentation will focus on websites that will help you to understand disability and how to create accessible resources for individuals with disabilities. I need to point out that this is a very select group of resources. It is not a comprehensive group of resources by any means. I also want to say that I do not work in the emergency management area, but I have worked with the emergency service providers in my county for more than a decade, and I've worked with access issues for more than 35 years. Also on this first slide is today's date and my name and contact information. Valerie Lewis, Administrator of Outreach Services at the Suffolk Cooperative Library System, and my email address is valerie@suffolknet.org. Next slide, please. If you were in our webinar last week, I left you with the thought of how to get started. And I want to talk about that for a minute. The way that you get started is to visit sites that can provide the basics of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Many of the sites offer free webinars and on accessibility in general and on specifics such as service animals. While you're at these sites, you will also want to subscribe to their email lists and e-newsletters in order to learn about upcoming webinars and trainings, and also keep track of any changes to the laws that apply to people with disabilities. This first page is just going to highlight websites that offer basic information and some more in-depth information on a variety of topics when understanding disability and the communication resources that you will need. Again, I will mention, as I did last week, the ADA homepage at ada.gov. They also have a hotline at 1-800-514-0301. You'll want to visit the United States Access Board. The Access Board was created in 1973 to ensure access to federally funded facilities. It is an independent government agency which develops and maintains design criteria for the built environment, so the physical environment and all types of physical items. And they are devoted to the accessibility of people with disabilities. The National Organization on Disability offers a wide variety of websites, a wide variety of resources. I like the United Spinal Association as it also has a wonderful disability etiquette booklet that you can download. I provided the links to both the main site and the etiquette booklet so you can access that information. Easter seals. They have a lot of information on technology and the basics of understanding disability. The National Network of Libraries of Medicine. They have a lot of information that pertains to all different types of libraries, whether it be a medical library or a library in a museum. But they also have a lot of free webinars and downloadable resources that include information on accessibility and inclusion in your programming and services. And finally, I'll mention the American Association of People with Disabilities, AAPD. This is a wonderful website for understanding advocacy skills regarding people with disabilities. Next slide, please. One of the main resources I use is the ADA Technical Assistance Centers, which provide information and guidance on the Americans with Disabilities Act. The ADA National Network consists of 10 regional ADA centers and an ADA Regional Knowledge Translation Center. The regional ADA centers are distributed throughout the United States to provide local assistance and foster implementation of the ADA. I've included a link where you can go and find your local center. They also have a hotline, which is 1-800-949-4232. The four centers I tend to use the most, for no particular reason, are the Northeast ADA, Southwest ADA, Great Lakes ADA, and Mid-Atlantic ADA. These four centers provide me with a wealth of resources through downloadable materials and ongoing webinars and trainings on all issues related to access. Next slide, please. I've included some resources for living with different types of disabilities. I'll mention these sites because you should be visiting them not only to learn about the basics of that disability, but also to find an incredible abundance of resources on creating accessible communication resources. So resources for living with vision loss, you'll want to visit the sites of the American Foundation for the Blind, the National Federation of the Blind, and the American Council of the Blind. When you're looking for resources for living with hearing loss, there are a few things that I'll mention here. But the thing I want to start out with is a note that I found on the homepage of the National Association of the Deaf. It states that less than 3% of the 911 call centers in America can receive text. When we think about individuals who use text in order to access emergency services and other resources, you can understand how dangerous it is that not more or all of our emergency providers cannot be reached in this format. An important thing to know about is the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf. You'll want to use this site to find a sign language interpreter for your programs and meetings. You can find them at www.rid.org. RID is a wonderful place to find the exact interpreter you need. It tells you about the different levels of certification that they have and the different specialized skill sets that may apply to the program you're doing. You want to visit the National Association of the Deaf homepage, which again will guide you to advocacy, resources, and information on living with deafness. Gallaudet University is another amazing resource. Take a lot of time while visiting their site. Next slide, please. And while you are at their site, you will want to go to the Lawrence Clark National Deaf Education Center, which has their information to go resources on any topic you can imagine relating to living life as a person who is deaf or hard of hearing. It is important to know about assistive listening systems. Listening systems can be used to amplify sound for individuals living with hearing loss. There are various types of assistive listening devices, including infrared, loop, and FM systems. You will need to determine which type of these devices would work best in your environment. And it's important to realize that assistive listening devices are not devices that are useful to people who are deaf. It's important to know about the 711 relay service. While it may be a service that is not as highly used today because there are many other options available, the 711 relay service is a free nationwide telephone service that can be used to communicate with a person who has a hearing or speech disability. Just like we have 211, 311, 411, 511, 611, and 911, we have 711. If you want to learn more about that communication resource, you can dial 711 or visit the link that I have in this presentation. While there are a number of options for communicating with a person who is deaf or hard of hearing, such as email, text, video sign language interpreting, captioning, and real-time captioning, the best way to determine your communication options is to discuss those options with the individual. I also want to say that I am not the expert in this field, and our next two presenters will be the people you want to turn to for the best resources for serving people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Next slide, please. Here are resources for living with a learning disability. I've included 4 of them here, but again, many more if you do your research. The one I like to use a lot is Learning Disabilities Online, which is LD Online. Understood, which is understood.org. I really like the National Association of Special Education Teachers. I am not a teacher, but the page provides not only information for teachers, but children, adults, students, and caregivers. You'll find an incredibly wide array of resources on this site for people with learning disabilities. And then finally, the National Center for Learning Disabilities. Resources for living with a mental health disability. Prior to COVID-19, and certainly currently and going forward, many people are facing mental health and addiction disabilities. You'll want to start by researching the national resources, which can lead you to more local organizations to provide this type of information. SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, is an amazing resource that I use on a regular basis. I also regularly receive emails and information about webinars that are offered through this platform. the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, National Alliance on Mental Illness, which is NAMI, and the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law are all amazing resources. The Bazelon Center will help you to understand the rights of people living with mental health and addiction disabilities. It's an important resource when providing information. Next slide, please. One of the things I mentioned last week during my presentation was how important it is to provide employment information in accessible formats. And I'm talking about all levels of the employment process. You want to think about how you're advertising the employment or volunteer opportunity, how you're promoting it within your organization and the formats you're using. If you're putting information online, are those resources accessible in terms of filling out an application for a job? And then when you have staff and volunteer resources, do you have all those resources in accessible formats? So when we talk about employment information regarding people with disabilities, these, I think, are the most important places to start. I'm going to read through the list, and I hope you'll visit them all for important resources. Again, the Americans with Disabilities Act homepage, the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, the Job Accommodation Network, JAN, the United States Department of Labor, Office of Disability Employment Policy, and understand that each state has an Office of Vocational Rehabilitation that can provide services to children and adults with disabilities, particularly through the transition process from school to work. And those are organizations where you can find employees with disabilities that are qualified for the work that you need to have done. These services vary from state to state, so you'll want to know that as well. You also want to contact your local independent living center. I'm going to go back for 1 second just to mention the Job Accommodation Network. They have representatives that serve each area of the country. So when you contact them, they can truly understand the laws and the individual needs of your particular geographic area. They have a wide array of incredible resources that I hope you will tap into. Next slide, please. An important thing, again, to be aware of is your website and online information. I talked last week about the fact that during COVID and going forward, we may not have the opportunity to be out doing community events to talk about preparedness and recovery resources. And so right now, all of our information is online. But just by the nature of the formats of which our information is provided and the incompatibility to the software that people may be using to access your website and online resources, really prohibits a large portion of our population from accessing all of your wonderful information. These sites will help you to make sure that your website, your online material, your social media blasts, and your virtual programming is accessible to the widest audience possible. WebAIM.org, the Web Accessibility Initiative, W3C.org, the National Center for Accessible Media, NCAM at WGBH.org, Easter Seals Technology, Bridging Apps, Do It Accessible Website Design, Usability.gov. Last week I mentioned that not only is it important for your page to be accessible, but usable and understandable, consistent in its layout, so that even if someone is not using a technology to access your page, it is understandable and usable to the widest audience. While you are at usability.gov, you'll want to access their page with accessibility basics. I provided all those links here. And then finally, I want to mention RESNA. RESNA is the Rehabilitation Engineering Assistive Technology Society of North America. If you visit their site, you will find much information on assistive technology and access for people with disabilities. Next slide, please. And this is my final slide, and I included this here because these are important resources for you to access. It is reading materials in accessible formats, and the organizations mentioned here are organizations which you can reach out to and share your print information, and they can make it available in accessible formats. Remember that people with print disabilities are not just people who are blind or have low vision, but people who cannot hold a book, turn a page, or pick something up. So it may be a person with Parkinson's who cannot hold a page steady enough in order to read the information. So when you think about your print information, it needs to be accessible to everyone. And when you think that it's not accessible just to people who are blind or visually impaired, think in a much broader way. You want to contact the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled, which is part of the Library of Congress, and provides free nationwide library services for people with disabilities in both audio and Braille formats. The materials are delivered directly to patrons' homes, and for the past several years are also digitally downloadable to individuals who can access that format. So if you are a person who cannot hold a book, turn a page, or read a traditional print book, you may be eligible for this format. In Southern New York, we are served by the Andrew Heiskill Braille and Talking Book Library, which is a branch of the New York Public Library and one of the libraries for the blind and print disabled, which is part of a network across the country. Contact Bookshare.org to see if they can make your materials available in accessible formats to their users, Learning Ally, and then finally, and probably most importantly, Newsline for the Blind, which is an organization through the National Federation of the Blind that provides print materials in audio and downloadable formats for individuals with all types of print disabilities. It can be accessed on a variety of platforms and even through technology such as Alexa. I hope that if you have any questions, you will feel free to reach out to me to discuss any of these websites or other resources you may need. Again, my name is Valerie Lewis, and you can reach me at valerie@suffolknet.org. I very much appreciate your time today and hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Actually, if you wouldn't mind, we do have a few questions for you. I know you need to sign off a little bit early today, but if you have a few minutes.
I'm fine. Go ahead. Yep.
Okay. How do you use assistive listening devices for hard of hearing attendees on Zoom?
Well, I would say again that I am not the expert on this, so I'm not sure that the answer I give would be a respectable answer. But I imagine that if you are hard of hearing and have headsets that can amplify, and you can just plug those headsets into the device you're using for your Zoom meeting, that may be a helpful technology. But again, I don't want to speak to that issue. I am more familiar with using the assistive listening devices, you know, in a live environment.
Okay. Could maybe one of our other speakers, could they speak to that question?
Yes, this is Gay Jones. When I get into my presentation, I'll answer that question.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gay. Where can someone find resources for mental health and cultural factors?
In all of those areas that I mentioned, SAMHSA and NAMI, much more attention is currently being provided to providing multicultural information and addressing different portions of our population. SAMHSA, in fact, does a lot of training with faith-based environments to reach all different individual communities across the country.
Okay. This might be a silly question, but does ASL work for all languages?
That is a Gay or Aaron question.
Okay, then maybe we'll just hold off on that for a little bit. I was hoping we
Okay.
had just Valerie questions here. Any resources on how to educate the community about mental health and to remove the stigma?
Yes. Virtually every community has some type of organization that focuses on mental health disabilities. You can really find an enormous amount of resources through those local organizations that do presentations. Even still, while I've transitioned to online, my local organization is the Association for Mental Health and Wellness. They have done several years of mental health first aid training for our organization and for public libraries. And I also work with representatives from NAMI in my local area. So I think if you go to the national sites, you can whittle down to your local resources. And also, virtually every area has an Office of Mental Health, either locally in their county or at their state level, which can provide you with a list of local organizations that are dealing with these issues.
Okay. Do you think all announcements about preparedness should include a contact number for the disability coordinator in case of an accommodation request?
For the disability coordinator, at what level? Are you talking about at a local level?
I wouldn't know. I didn't ask the question, but
Okay.
I mean, I could almost answer it myself because this is something that that we ourselves have only started doing recently by working more with our disability integration advisors.
I would say that at the local level, again, if you look to your county, virtually every county has an office of services for people with disabilities and is theoretically working with the county emergency service providers. In our county, our emergency service providers are outstanding in their efforts to ensure access to people with disabilities and even have a database where people can sign up for evacuation purposes. So it's important to find your local office that serves the needs of people with disabilities and then also contact emergency service providers well in advance of an emergency to see what types of resources they have available so that they can you're on their list in the event of an emergency.
Okay. I'm just going to ask you one more question, and then we'll let you run.
Okay.
Do you have any resources for people to take, and I might be saying this wrong, visual gestural communication trainings, as this can be helpful? Do you know what they're referring to?
Not 100% sure, but I think that disability awareness training in general, and then if you're talking about visual training in particular, I think it's important to reach out to organizations like Helen Keller and independent living centers that can help you understand how to interact with a person who is visually impaired. For a quick example, often if a person is using a white cane, people will be very compassionate and want to help them and grab their arm. Well, first of all, you're scaring the blind person, so don't do that. And then on top of that, it can be very disorienting if you grab the arm of an individual who relies on a cane in order to feel where they are going. As a reminder, never, ever, ever interact with a person's guide dog. And then I think there are important facts to learn about through different organizations. I mentioned all of these organizations today because I think that the best way for you to learn about really serving the needs of a person with a specific type of disability is to find those organizations that work with those individuals. There's nothing we could do without the input of people with disabilities in understanding their needs.
Okay. Thank you so much for your presentation and your time today, Valerie. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Everyone else, have a great day. Bye-bye.
Okay. Jay, it's all yours.
Thank you, Valerie. We are going to take a little shift here and talk about more specific issues of accessibility during the pandemic that Aaron and I worked with at FEMA. A lot of the things that we'll talk about will apply to a lot of the issues that I'm rooted in the chat box. So the things that we talk about a lot right now is that I'm going to briefly touch on. I think we could probably have a third session here, but I'm going to try to, I need to put most of my emphasis on technology platforms, but we will briefly talk about masks and kind of like the evolution of accessibility through COVID-19 that we experienced, and some of the other issues that we encountered. One of the most challenging things that we faced, and it throws me for a loop, is that I am hard of hearing, and I depend probably 90% or 95% of my time on lip reading. And I say that because I grew up having to do that. Not everybody is an efficient lip reader, but when you put a mask on somebody that's covered, it takes that communication down tremendously. And at that point, I'm pretty much functioning profound deaf because I cannot communicate well when people are using that. A lot of the people are coming out with the clear mask. Some people are making them. There's some products on the ground. But the issue that we talk about a lot at FEMA and in an emergency management situation is how are you going to communicate with somebody who does have the need to be able to look at somebody's facial expressions, because it's not just lip reading. DOJ is aware of that, a lot of issues around this. And so I'm really happy that virtual platforms are in play, because even through all of the things that Aaron and I have done over the last 6 months, we have seen a real upswing of accessibility throughout COVID-19. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Nothing's ever perfect. But what I do think that happened was it put in people's mindset that we may be dealing with a virtual world even after, long after the COVID-19 is over. It'll never be over, maybe. So we've got a lot of things that we talk about, but we talk about issues in terms of there are a lot of different technology platforms out there. And the most common ones that we use are Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Adobe Connect, WebEx, and also Google Meet. I didn't put Google Meet up here because we at FEMA has not approved that to be used. But a lot of federal government, they are using a lot of platforms to be able to communicate with people in and outside of their agencies. And so what we found is that there's some real pros and cons of each one of these platforms that create some problems in how we communicate with each other. And I'm going to go back here. So for a lot of people on this phone call, it looks like a lot of people, some of them are part of local government, some are part of agencies, some are part of federal government. And so as we look at these platforms, I often look at the accessibility of it. I was looking at an article earlier this morning talking about these platforms and how they're changing how people are communicating, and they were rating them. But I saw nothing about accessibility, which doesn't surprise me, because a lot of times, even though the company themselves is looking at how they can make their platforms accessible, there are other factors that make them inaccessible to a lot of us. And I'll give you a good example of what happened at FEMA is when the COVID-19 pandemic was declared a national disaster, it created a lot of havoc on local and state and federal level communication lines. All of the available Fed relay programs like video relay service, intercaption, CapTel, and all of the traditional telecommunications relay service pieces were all completely overwhelmed with phone calls. And people were complaining they couldn't get in and so forth. So what happened at the federal level was kind of the same thing in the fact that the conference lines that they used normally for communicating with people was basically shut down. Now, for those of us who needed access, particularly captioning, it became extremely difficult because the Fed relay service provides the captioning service for a lot of those meetings on that conference line. And even though my colleagues could use the video relay service from or within FEMA, some of the interpretive services, I was left without access. And so it became a rough struggle to be able to do a lot of things because even though I can do that on a one-on-one, when it comes to using that as an accommodation, it does not work well for me. And there are different reasons why I sign and don't and use captioning, but my main mode of communication and access is captioning. So they then announced that we needed to use Microsoft Teams. Well, Microsoft Teams is an internal organizational platform, so to speak. It's like Skype or any of the others. It's an internal communication mode, and it wasn't accessible to either Aaron or I because, number one, unless the interpreter had a FEMA.gov email, they couldn't get in. And the same thing with the captioning. So we had to make shift a lot of things, and we could use the captioning, but it had to be an external link. It was a separate screen. So you all know what it's like when you get captioning, where you have to do a split screen to be able to get that access. So over time, we started working with Zoom, which FEMA allows us to use. And Zoom was much more accessible, but we couldn't use the federal relay service. We had to use a third-party captioning service. And of any of the services we can use, Zoom is the easiest, and it is the most accessible across the board. They're supposed to be coming out with automated captioning. I hope it's as good as Google Meet. If I had my way, I would be using Google Meet. It's a very simple app, but it's something that's easily used, very, very easy to use with third-party interpreters and third-party captioning. I want to make it very clear here that aside from automated captioning, these products that we use rely very heavily on third parties. So, but it allows you to be able to find those resources, and they should be easier to find if you don't have them local. Not every state or local is the same. But if you have that access to an interpreting agency that can do remote interpreting and also the remote captioning, you can pretty much build an accessible platform for it to be used. Microsoft Teams does have automated captioning. It's really bad. I was talking to Aaron this morning on Microsoft Teams. He had turned it off because it was so bad. And it started becoming distracting for me because it was not accurate at all. Adobe Connect, you can see by the screen today of what that looks like. We have a lot of problems bringing in an interpreter on a screen here because the pixelation is not that great. WebEx is a lot like Microsoft Teams. I mean, no, it allows you to bring in an interpreter, but it doesn't allow you to stream captioning. So you have to have an external link for WebEx. Even though so we had to change a lot of those meetings over to Zoom because it was not working. So there's a lot of issues centered around these platforms, but when you make a decision on which product you want to use, and by the way, there will be a lot more products coming out now that we are really looking at virtual platforms, that even though the products may build in, quote, accessibility, there's some factors that you really need to look at if you're going to use them. One is, do you have restrictions on bringing in a third party, or if you have something like Microsoft Teams that's within an agency, how do you bring in those folks? And so you've got to make some decisions on which one of these platforms is going to work best for you. The captioning part of it is going to be a big deal because some of the platforms have really good voice recognition. I'm just really kind of surprised that Microsoft's automated captioning isn't any good, given the fact that they've got such a strong accessibility team. So hopefully we will see some improvement in that. And so you've got to be able to look at what products you can bring in to be able to provide accessibility. The thing about Zoom, and somebody made a comment about hackers on Zoom, within FEMA, you've got this firewall, you've got your security issues that you have to deal with. And you've got to make sure that you can bring people into the Zoom platform or Google Meet that it meets your security, because one of the issues that FEMA deals with, that many of the other folks on the phone, is PII information. And that information needs to be, I just got knocked off.
Okay, Gay, give us a minute.
Yeah.
Allison, can you get that PowerPoint back up? I don't see it either.
Okay.
She's loading it now.
Yeah. So, like I said, when you start dealing with a lot of these platforms and the new ones that will come out and so forth, you've got to look at how you can support some of these accessibilities. You're still going to be required to provide an interpreter or captioning, just like you would in person, except now you've got to bring them in remotely. One of the questions that was earlier was dealing with some of the external apps that you see. Coming from the Missouri Assistive Technology product, assistive technology is my big area of expertise. That's why this is my stuff. A lot of the speech-to-text software like Otter, Lingmo, Ava, a lot of those, there's new ones coming out. You'll have to find one that works for you. Otter is the one that I use, and I think I'm going to be using it when I go out because I've got to be able to communicate with people better. So you have a lot of personal type apps that you can get off of your phone to be able to provide some of that captioning ability in a platform situation if they don't provide it. But we've got to be able to let people know that if they request interpreting or captioning on one of these platforms, you still got to provide it just like you would in person. Some of the issues that we deal with within FEMA and dealing with disaster survivors is this is going to be a huge challenge. And now that we're working with law, those of us at headquarters are really working tightly with the folks in the field. That some of our folks are now being deployed out physically to the site, and the disaster survivor assistance teams are one of them. So they have their iPads with the traditional quote Z5, which is a VRI, video remote interpreting platform, that they can use BRI requires that 2 or more people be in person to be able to access that service. BRI cannot be used in a virtual platform. That's more talking about on-demand interpreting, and I've had a lot of conversations with other federal agencies about what that means, because we are now in a real need for on-demand interpreting like we would BRI, but we can't use the traditional BRI program for the platforms that we use. So, we're looking at all kinds of technology out there with Google Meet, with FaceTime, to be able to do virtual inspections, home inspections. And that's going to be a real challenge, because you can't assume that everybody uses an iPhone or everybody uses an Android phone. You've got to come up with several solutions here to be able to accommodate folks in the field. The one thing that I have encouraged people to do is if they register for FEMA for assistance, they need to put down their telecommunications relay service number, i.e. the video remote service, the intercaption numbers, because you're assigned a 10-digit phone number for those services. And that way, then anybody can call you through your service that you're most comfortable with. It gets into a little bit of a confusion when somebody puts their cell phone number down and somebody calls you and they can't get a hold of you because it's not accessible. And I could go another hour and talk about that, but that those are the kind of things that we're trying to get people to work through so that they can make decisions on what they want to do in the field. The other thing is, and this is what I would tell a lot of folks at the federal, state, or local level, or even in a not-for-profit community organization or an independent living center, or anybody else that has the responsibility to provide access for these platforms. You need to look at what your contracts look like. It's clearly important that we do contracts with folks that we can rely on and that we trust to be able to do these services. Like I said before, one of the things that we've been doing is trying to encourage people to use their telecommunications relay service number to be able to have people get to that third party so that we can adequately communicate with somebody. And I talked about video remote interpreting. This is something that a lot of people do not understand. Video remote interpreting was put into place because when video relay services, or VRS, was put into place, they were having a lot of problems with people calling somebody at the desk next to them, for instance, in the same space that they are, and that's clearly against regulations with the FCC in doing some of the traditional telecommunications relay services. So then a lot of these companies and a lot of interpretive agencies then started establishing what we call video remote interpreting to do exactly what I said before. You would have 2 people in the same space connected to a captioning service. That is not part of the telecommunications relay service in the FCC. those are separate programs. They have nothing to do with the regulations within the FCC. So with that in mind, what we're trying to look at now is more of a what can we do if we need to call an interpreter and use them in a video call, and how is that done? Because most remote interpreting services that are provided through these platforms are scheduled. So we've got to, that's probably one of the biggest issues that, surprisingly, that we're going to have to deal with to being able to provide services to the person that we work with. Now, somebody asked about assistive listening devices earlier, so I'll answer that question. Assistive listening devices can either be a large area assistive listening device, like in a theater or an auditorium of some type, a school auditorium, where the system is built into the PA system in that room. And then if you need an assistive listening device, like you go to the Kennedy Center here in Washington, D.C., you can go up and get a quote, an assistive listening device that you can either put around your neck to use your hearing aid or use headset to be able to access that system. So you have your own individual device that you can control the volume and so forth. You go into a movie theater, they give you an assistive listening device, same concept. They set it for the theater that you're going into and all that. That's a large area type of assistive listening device. When you talk about one-on-one, you're talking about basically two transmitters and receivers, a transmitter and a receiver with a mic on it, and you have a one-on-one conversation. So there are two different ways to use an assistive listening device, but those are the two main reasons. So with that, if anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Great, and to our audience, I'm sorry we're going a couple minutes over. We're just going to take some of the questions that we have here, and then we will conclude the webinar. So one of the questions that was asked earlier that wasn't answered was regarding ASL and whether or not it works for all languages.
I'm going to let Aaron answer that if you would like.
Hi, this is Erin. Yes, I noticed in the chat some people did respond to that question, and the answer is yes. ASL is used primarily in the U.S. and Canada, and every country has their own language system. Some are kind of overlapped with other parts of the language. So we have, facial expressions, we have hand shapes, we have hand movements, hand location, and we call non-manual markers, and all of those things are part of the language. Now, every system or every language system has their own grammar, their own structure, their own syntax. So some countries kind of borrow some locations or movement, but it is unique to countries. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I would say so. Thank you. Gay or Aaron, for those in the media, what is a good way to make print publications more deaf and blind friendly?
How to make,
I beg your pardon?
and the captioning didn't come up.
Oh,
Oh, okay. What is a great way to make print publications? Okay. I'll answer part of that, and Aaron Aaron talked a lot about the plain language in the first session, and that's in the first session that's available for people to access. The other one is for blind friendly. There are two different ways. One is you go and get your publications in Braille or large print, and you can also make sure that your publications are quote 508 compliant, and there's a lot of resources. Basically 508.gov, your Microsoft Office products, Word, PowerPoint, and Excel all have a feature built into it that you can look at the accessibility as you go along and make the changes. So you're making your product accessible to screen readers on the computer. Now, you also have the other part where people have their own systems that they use, whether it's a screen reader or a Braille keyboard or any of the other pieces that somebody may use, the screen enlarging program, the CCTVs. A lot of people can make those changes themselves with the computer, but if they don't have a screen reader. The screen reader is primarily a reading program, and the biggest reason why 508 needs to be adhered to for publications online. So.
Okay. Aaron, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I had a comment on that. So even though you mentioned print, there are some video resources that we send out. So it's important that we keep in mind that in the description of the videos, also adding a transcript of the video under the video description. So there are some people who are deaf, blind, or blind who rely on the transcription for the screen reader or maybe read that themselves. So also, if you have some kind of graphic or something that's happening that the narrator isn't narrating, it's important that you use audio descriptions of the graphic or context for individuals who are blind and can't see that. So I just wanted to add those two comments there. And an emphasis on the plain language. So thank you, Gabe, for mentioning that.
Thank you. How can we use Microsoft Teams to communicate during a PowerPoint presentation for the hearing impaired? It sounds like that's a good question.
Yeah, good luck. Like I said, Microsoft Teams, the automated captioning is really, really hard. Because normally what they do with PowerPoint presentations, they put it in like they do with the Adobe, and the captioning is turned on. I do know that Aaron and I tested Microsoft Teams this morning because I was told that Fred Relay, which is one of the captioning services we use, would be able to stream the captioning, and it didn't work because, again, we couldn't get the captioner inside of the Microsoft Teams meeting. So you can't get a third party into Microsoft Teams. So So good luck. I've been real frustrated with Microsoft Teams as a whole because it's very hard to use in terms of access.
Okay. When would you say it is appropriate to use automated captioning, if ever?
I am a big believer in emerging technologies, obviously. If you find that the captioning within the platform is really good, you can go to Microsoft Teams and see what that's like within a meeting, because you can't use that. You cannot use Microsoft Teams captioning with a video call with somebody. But Google Meet, you can. I mean, you can use it, and that captioning is spot on. I mean, it is just spot on. I was shocked, even for somebody with my voice, which is hard of hearing speech, basically, or deaf speech. It was spot on. If that automated captioning is like that, use it.
Okay. How can we go about encouraging, some of the major networks like the NBC, ABC, CBS to include picture-in-picture ASL interpreters during breaking news or disaster updates?
We've seen a lot of great improvements. We saw almost every governor use an interpreter, either by their side or in picture. The problem you're going to have with that is that the FCC, if you look at what they require the broadcasters to do, it has nothing to do with interpreters. It's all captioning and making sure that captioning is not covered and making sure that there's other pieces on the TV that are easily read by somebody with a vision loss. But there's nothing in there about the provision of interpreters. We've worked with FCC, we've worked with the National Broadcast Association, and I know NAD has done the same thing. And it's going to be a matter of local advocacy to get those things done. I'm going to tell you, advocacy works.
It does work.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I think that's all the time we have today.
If I could add to that really quickly, this is Erin. Like Gay mentioned, local advocacy is something we really encourage. For those who write to the local TV stations and write to the National Association of Broadcast, to just continue to say, we need this to happen, more, getting more local support and just gaining their awareness will make a big difference.
Thanks, Erin.
Can I answer two more questions really, really quickly, and it'll just be two short answers? I think they're critical. Somebody asked where you can find a ClearMask. If you type in ClearMask, there's a lot of products out there, and it's called ClearMask. So it's really pretty effective. The other one was concerning what third party we use for captioning for our platform. We have a national contract that anybody in FEMA, whether you're at the region or in a JFO or at headquarters, can use to get those services. You can just get, if anybody in FEMA wants to email me about that, we can get that information to you. No, I'm done.
All right. Thank you, Gay, and thank you, Erin and Valerie. Even though she's not on, you guys are true champions. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to share some of your expertise with us. As of right now, this is the final in the accessible communication series, but I think that there are still more questions out there, and perhaps we'll look to do another one in the future. But coming up next week is September 1st, which isn't on your screen. We're going to kick off National Preparedness Month by talking about individual and community preparedness. It is also the kickoff of a very short 30-minute lunch and learn series. I promise not to go too long on those. We have pet preparedness coming up. We have a FEMA Corps team here in New York at the World Trade Center working with us in preparedness, and they're going to tell you all about FEMA Corps. I have a great panel of speakers talking about youth and preparedness and how to go about engaging them. We've asked several people who are youth preparedness champions in their county who are doing, I think, creative programs that they're welcome to share all of their information with us so that other communities might do the same. There's a whole Lunch and Learn series on your screen right now. You can click on any of those. And if you want to just see all our upcoming webinars, click on that first link. Today's webinar and all the ones we've done in the past have been recorded. They can be found at the second link. And if you want to subscribe to Region 2 News, that's the third link. And any questions you have for anyone on my team, just go ahead and email us at FEMA-R2-prepares@fema.dhs.gov. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. If you have an extra minute and you fill out the survey, it would be much appreciated. Otherwise, we will talk to you again next week. You're free to drop.